Well, thank you everybody for coming on the last day here. Appreciate everyone coming to we'll call it a drug discovery talk. We know that most of the people who are here in the conference are some type of SaaS or enterprise solution. So thanks for coming, everyone. So we'll have a really great conversation today about just kind of AI drug discovery, where it's been, where it's going, what we think works. We have a great panel about diversification across multiple parts of the industry. So I'd like to have everyone introduce themselves first, just so we can kind of get some background. Mickey?
Yeah, thanks. Mickey Atwell, and thanks for the opportunity to speak here. Very quick, brief history. So spent a long time in academia. After I quit medical school, disappointed my mum. She never forgave me. Spent quite a bit of time developing machine learning algorithms, analyzing large data sets. Moved to industry, joined Regeneron as the head of data science. Involved in all aspects of drug development from preclinical to clinical trials, and recently moved to Flagship, overseeing a portfolio of a number of different companies in the platform space, and now transitioning into starting my own venture in New York City.
Great. Yusuf?
Hi, everyone. Happy to be with you today in this conversation. So Yusuf Aidelkaid. I'm applied mathematics and computing engineer by training from France. So excuse my accent in advance. And today I represent Gilead, where I run an AI research center within drug development, so the D of R&D. And we have a large remit going from clean dev, clinical development, through submissions, and also pharmacovigilance. I have a team of multidisciplinary folks, engineers and PhDs. Prior to that, I worked in retail. Actually, I was making makeup and skincare at L'Oreal for a while, but then converted into biotech, starting with Genentech and today at Gilead. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Great. Nirav?
Excellent. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Nirav Metha. I lead all things innovation for our life sciences practice, specifically focused on all things R&D. My pedigree is more technology. I grew up in the technology circles, and I'm more an R&D person by trade more than academia. So, I come from more of hands-on work, especially in the development space. Over the years, obviously, we made tremendous progress. Going from the days of machine learning and NLP, and now Gen AI completely transforming what we can do. And especially opportunities in the development space are tremendous. I lead a team of expertise in all things AI engineering, as well as just Gen AI based innovations. This the uptick is what I'm very excited about talking about today. Yeah.
Fantastic. So the first thing I kind of want to touch on with all of us is drug discovery is a large, all-encompassing term. It can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It can be the research side, it can be the development side, it can be applications for government regulatory filing. So real quick for each of you, kind of what does drug discovery mean to you? And how do you see AI impacting how you see it? Nirav, you want to start?
Yeah. So I'll start with the D side of R&D, really, because I'll leave the R side to obviously the experts, and everybody can tell you with drug discovery and development being such a highly regulated space, the biggest opportunity is going to be on the R side, right? As much as we can accelerate, but even on the D side, on the development side, this tremendous opportunity to accelerate, and every day that we can get a drug faster to market in the hands of a patient is valuable, right? So, with the uptick that we are seeing and the opportunities with AI, especially in creating or accelerating regulatory pathways, improving PTRS, that's really where a lot of the focus is, and that's what I'm excited about.
Yeah, Yusuf?
Yeah, same. I think I represent more the D than R, but I did work most of my career in R&D, whether it be chemistry or now in biotech. So what I would say, drug discovery represent for me is obviously, besides the R of R&D, experimentation. I think that's what drug discovery represents for me. It's a vast domain where you have multidisciplinary teams coming together to give birth to a new compound, and I think that's for me also the starting point for a long journey until the medicine gets into the patients. So I think drug discovery represents also for me the foundation for human health. I would say improvement and evolution. But it also represents a cost center because it's very expensive to run the experimentations. And last, I think it does represent or sound as a legacy kind of thing. So I remember when I graduated, so there was no way for me to go to R&D because R&D for me was like for all the people and like people who are not industrial, more closer to academia. But I think it's definitely has that legacy kind of piece of it, and I'm hoping that we're going to touch on that in the conversation on how AI can, take that old school approaches and legacy approaches to something a little bit more faster and modern.
And Maggie?
Yeah, I think that the premise of this question is kind of interesting. I mean, if the panel was significantly bigger, you would have a wide distribution of answers. I mean, it's differing things to different people. And I think therein lies in the challenge in drug discovery and development, right? Because we're all kind of focused on differing aspects of this. And I think it's useful to just step back and ask, what is the global optimization function we're trying to solve for? It's going from science to making a positive impact on patients. And, when we focus on different aspects of that train, going from research development, that's where I think, we see the attrition rates of drug development. So having that overall picture is useful. It's a challenge, especially when you have this interdisciplinary environment where you have chemists, biologists, geneticists now working with computational scientists and machine learning researchers. Personally, for myself, I've come at this more from the research side, from academia, training in medicine and in physics, mostly focused on target discovery and development of new drugs. But my experience in drug development in big pharma has really opened up my eyes, and I could speak more about this later, on how the development aspect has really had less focus in terms of where AI can play a significant role going forward.
Yeah, so I'll say, making use of, you kind of preempted my next question is, where are the opportunities right now? Like, what have you seen actually develop and speed up the process of drug discovery? Is it the research side? Is it the D side of everything? We all know clinical trials takes a significant amount of time. We have not figured out a way to do that quicker. What have you seen that actually works in the real world in terms of speeding up the process? Yuzo?
Okay, I can start. So I just want to also make a point that I actually learned also the hard way, especially in biotech or pharma overall. So there is a gray zone between the D and the R, and that's the reverse, translational discovery or medicine. Because if you think about the R, these are of course people running a lot of experimentations. Would it be virtually or digitally or physically, like in silico, in vitro? But then I think the link between the D and the R is quite interesting, because in the modern world, with the amount of data we accumulated on the D side, like real world data, clinical data, claims, you name it, biomarkers, EHR. So insights from that world can actually go in the other way, in the opposite direction, to help people find new pathways or just find the hit and experiment maybe 100 or even 1,000 instead of millions of experimentation. So that's one. So I think quickly, I think to understand where we are today, I think it's very important to just follow the life cycle of a molecule. I think for me, the real transformation was like 2016, 15 maybe with AlphaFold, where for the first time it was really fascinating to see AI folding proteins, and that was like a revelation that we are into something before even ChatGPT. So that's one, and I think it continues, especially that the DeepMind team put that model out there to the public. And since then, we have seen an emergence of human in the loop, or lab in the loop as well, where machine learning is augmenting researchers to discover new compounds very fast. And I have this example with a company called Exscientia, I think. They developed an OCD, went from discovery to phase 1 in less than 12 months, I think, or average 12 months instead of 4 to 5 years. And that tells you where we are today with drug discovery. And then for the D, for me, it's operations, right? Like you need to make sure that from the moment you design the molecule, you have AI helping for indications or even targets identification. Machine learning is very good, and AI is very good doing that. And then you go to the operations, that's into the life cycle, where machine learning can predict or forecast the enrollment period for patients. And then you go into even using real world data to predict the success rate for the clinical trial. A lot of people use AI for digital pathology, which is, I think, one of the most exciting things, and also digital twins, because we do want to know what is going on in silico before we go into in vivo, because it costs billions of dollars to run a clinical research or run a clinical trial. It takes 15 years in average, and then 8% success rate. So you have to define your battle in what's going on today with AI in biotech, and you have to choose what you are optimizing for. If you are optimizing for speed, for cost, or for success, because you cannot have multiple objective functions. You need to determine one and then work your way back until you see like what are the use cases that you can work on.
Yeah. Do you agree? Are there certain parts of research that AI just inherently plays a much stronger role in its opportunity? Or is it just a broad application that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. In these AI conferences, we now have this new focus on healthcare and life sciences. But truth be told, those of us who've been working in drug development, we've been using machine learning for decades now. Right, so that's the way a lot of targets are discovered by analyzing huge genomic data sets or transcriptomic data sets, things that can't be analyzed by the human eye. So we've been deploying, unsupervised, clustering methods back to the early days, early 2000s. We don't call it AI, but nowadays I guess it does get rebranded as AI. So machine learning is not new in that space. If you think about the whole drug development life cycle, it's really a train. So those of you new to this environment, you start from what's the disease or indication we're focusing on. And then I'm trying to understand what target should we be focused on. So discovery of targets, right? And then once you've got a target, so this may be a protein that's overabundant in a certain tumor, for example, you may then, then want to shuttle your efforts to understanding what molecules you want to develop to actually treat that target or bind that target or edit it in some way. So once you've got so this could be a small molecule or an antibody or some genetic medicines approach. once you've got a good lead candidate, you then have to work with the regulatory folks to get an approval to put this medication into humans. So it's called an IND application, and that's a bit of a nightmare. Mountains and mountains of paperwork. I want to have that on my worst enemy, and then you have the clinical trials. So it's really a train. So you're kind of shuttling this basket over the fence, one over the other. And if you look at where AI has played a significant role, it is monotonically decreasing from target discovery to lead candidate optimization to clinical trials. Right. So AI has played a huge role upfront in the train, and it's gone down significantly as you get to clinical trial optimization and real-world evidence data. Although we are seeing some seedlings in those directions more recently. And why? Why is there a strong correlation between AI usage and where we are on the train? It really comes down to the data. There's so much data for target discovery that's available, publicly available. Genome sequencing has been commoditized. We've gone from 10 years, $1 billion for one genome, to now having millions of genomes readily available for us to analyze at scale. And that's great. And so we've identified so many new targets over the past 20 years for so many different indications. In fact, I'll go one step further. We probably have an embarrassment of riches. We probably have way too many targets. We don't know how to prioritize them. Our ability to predict which medications will work effectively in humans is terrible. Right? And the reason being is because we have very little data that is shared, commoditized, and publicly available. It's all siloed within big pharma companies, right? For reasons that you can postulate regarding IP. And then once you've got a drug in clinical trials, there is a 90% failure rate. Now, you have to be really, really an optimistic person to work in an industry where you're going to be failing 90% of the time, right? And this is a starting point once you've already done all the hard research and development to getting a drug. And there we have very little ability to predict which drugs will pass muster in phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And if we could have the data available to us, we can maybe utilize machine learning predictive models to better inform these trials. But that's where we're failing right now. So long story short, doing very well with research, not so great with development, terrible with clinical.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes to, we're kind of building the cart without having the directions in biology in its own. We still don't understand how everything works. So we're trying to figure out how to build a cart without the instructions. Nirav, from a large, you probably see more companies than we all do in terms of how companies are addressing both what Yusuf and Mickey had talked about. How are companies in general just dealing with the data that you need to inform these AI programs, and how are they actually implementing them?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I just want to piggyback on both the themes that I heard, right? Two themes are front and center. 10% success rate, it's appalling, right? 90% failure rate. Second is, the cycles are so long that we lose focus on the fact that at the end of the day, we're focusing on product and product life cycles, right? And the feedback back and this continuous evolution cycle doesn't happen just because the time spans are so long. You have a one shot, it's a linear process, right? As Mickey said. So, the key things that at least we are seeing is, on the research space, obviously, there's a lot of progress has been made, obviously, in very targeted lab scenarios, biotechs, et cetera. But a lot of the focus is now on, where there are real possibilities and business cases are around, can we actually shave off among the 10 years, at least 2 years on optimizing clinical trials and regulatory submissions, right? There are real practical areas where we can actually make progress. Integrated evidence planning is getting a resurgence just because of the possibilities and the pace at which we can actually start to right up front, right? I know I talk about PTRS, but in all reality it's PTR and CS. It's commercial success as well, right? And a lot of the focus now becomes, how do we actually right up front at the time of clinical trial not just look at the scientific side of things, but can we look at regulatory pathways? Do I really need to spend 56 weeks of MRI scans, or did somebody else get an approval by just doing it in 36 weeks? Can I actually save time in my clinical trials, right? Can I save cost on my clinical trials? Are there regulatory pathways that I can be proactive about? Can I actually know the target market segment in an incredibly crowded market that I can actually play in for commercial success? And actually doing a lot of that planning upfront with available data, with integrated evidence planning, creating target product profiles, doing a health tech assessment upfront. These are all real opportunities to essentially make sure that your development strategies and plans, as you're going through designing your clinical trials, et cetera, are well aligned with the asset strategy that you're trying to design. And that itself has the potential to shave off quite a bit of that life cycle, right? And so real practical areas where we are seeing a lot of resurgence, just because of the ability of Gen AI to start parsing through unstructured data, competitive intelligence, literature mining, these are all things that are real. Other areas that are really coming up, from last patient out, from database lock, how quickly can I get an ECTD filing done? How can I effectively engage with agencies? These are all areas where there's a lot of focus right now that pharma companies are taking.
Yeah, what I loved about what you obviously touch on all the different ways in which you can utilize it. Yeah. Something that's going to be a little bit contentious to some is that we are dealing with two very high, I'll say very deep knowledge bases of AI on one side, and then biology, chemistry, physics, another very deep educational way where people are very ingrained in what they do. Some people, when they talk about agents and they talk about dealing with customers on our side, that's simple. That sounds fantastic to deal with. We're dealing with two different groups that are trying to interact with each other and learn from each other, who don't always know how to speak the other person's language. How are the three of you dealing with the computer science AI education portion, and integrating that with the biological, chemical knowledge base that it is? How are you intertwining those two groups? How are you making those work? Is there anything that has worked or has not worked? Mickey?
Yeah, so
the research in the group.
Yeah, how much time do you have? Right. I mean, I think, just the way you phrase the question outlines the real challenge. I mean, it's two different groups, right? And it really shouldn't be two different groups. It should be one harmonized, interdisciplinary organization. And I've seen this, fail time and time again in well-meaning large organizations. Typical story, there's a mandate from top above, and someone says, "Oh, we've got to have AI in organization," right? The CEO, reads the New York Times. This is what we should be focusing on, right? So they hire a bunch of data scientists, machine learning scientists. They're often in their own department, sometimes in a different building, right? They never get to speak to the biologists. They never get to work with the wet lab folks. And that always fails, right? Because you're just not understanding what the right problems you need to be focused on. Where, I've tried to change the culture somewhat is having an integrated group where the data scientists are enmeshed with the biologists, the ones who are actually generating the data. So in my past life, they probably hate me now, but I actually required a lot of the data scientists to actually rotate in the wet lab and actually generate their own data. So if they're working on analyzing large-scale genomic data or single-cell sequencing data, they would have to rotate and actually generate those libraries and and load them up onto the sequencer and understand what's the sources of variability, and don't treat the data as if it comes from God, and vice versa. I've had to educate and give lectures to the experimentalists on basic data science. Don't get scared of the command shell terminal on your computer screen, and use that for basic data scripting. That's been enormously productive for us. So it allows us to close the feedback loop much more efficiently. You're not throwing the basket of data over the fence. People are able to have meaningful conversations with each other without treating machine learning scientists as if they're wizards, right? I mean, it's a horrible waste of a brain to give them a bunch of data and say, well, give us a p-value and a volcano plot, right? And treat that as if it was given to you by a mystical wizard, right? But we're understanding all the issues that can come with the analysis of data. So having an integrated group, it does take a lot of work. You do have to put your professorial hat on, and dedicate time to pedagogy, education, workshops. But I think the dividends pay off in the end.
Are you trying to say that centers of excellence are here to die, finally?
Give me an example of a good one, and I'll respond in kind.
Fair point. Yusuf?
Yeah, sorry. This is for me twofold. We have a historic reason for why we have that, bipolarity or something like that, and also organizational. So, like I said, we're before the panel, organizational. Just because before we talk about the AI people and the biology and scientists, there is already a dichotomy between development and research. I think first thing first, from process perspective, it needs to be in pharma because it's an old industry. Integrated model that starts with I like what you said about the data earlier, Mickey. I think we need to have a seamless way of making data accessible for development people to know, the mechanism of developing different compounds and use shared data. For example, having a repository where you store CT scans and imaging, that's actually a common data set that development people and research people can work on. And believe it or not, most of the pharma people, they don't even have a repository because they go to CROs, they do their clinical trial and data stays at the CRO level. So they really don't bring it back. So that's number one. Number two, I think the historic one is when the first time we used the computers heavily was, of course, the evolution of computer, but also when we had these bioinformaticians and biomathematicians starting to, use digital tools to accelerate discovery. But there was another wave, which is the data science wave, which was like, oh, there is a new discipline called data science, though it did exist like since the creation of mathematics. So there is that dichotomy also between you are a bioinformatician, I am the AI. So there is that AI divide that is also not helping today. And I think to solve it, of course, you talked about Center of Excellence, but also really, by experience, this is more practical. My AI researchers are not all PhDs in mathematics or statistics, computer science. So I have PhDs in biomedical, even biologists, people who converted into AI on the job. Either in their lab or after joining the company. And actually, they are the best ones. Why? Because they understand the subject matter expertise. They are able to talk science freely and easily with the R, scientists on the R side, and bring it back to the D. And believe it or not, there are a lot of common projects and use cases between the research people and development people. So for me, it's a paradigm shift. And really going or walking away from this model also of SaaS, because if every single team, every single department who has a business or a research question to answer goes and license the software, it doesn't help either, because that's a lot of silos and people work in a vacuum. I think AI can help also bringing people together around what I call a unified experience. And I think everything now is becoming agentic. And if you have that, like I said in the beginning, integrated framework for the data, making sure that your data is accessible, but the right people, but doesn't matter where they sit, and give them the same tools to create that continuum. Without that, I think, yes, like it's an old industry, we will always have that divide that other industries fixed because they have this integrated experience.
I think all great points. I'll just build on that, right? I think we're talking about the divide between the biologists and the data scientists. I'll go a step further and just also talk about engineering and platforms, right? That's another key aspect. The reason why I say that is there is just so much grunt work around, just what you brought up, right? Repositories around multimodal data, right? So many of our clients don't have multimodal data platforms set up in a way that can really accelerate all things research. It really needs to be backed up by strong platform-minded engineering teams that are able to get some of those out of the way for a lot of the scientists and the biologists, right? The same thing as we look towards, the rest of the continuum, a lot of the focus on scientific knowledge mining, regulatory content mining. These are all opportunities where taking a platform-based approach, removing those hurdles and essentially giving both the data scientists as well as the biologists a starting point is really something that is now a need of the hour to accelerate. And we are seeing a lot of movement in that space to just sort of start to consolidate siloed programs and start thinking in terms of, where we can accelerate with platforms. And, I know we talk about it in terms of technology platforms. The other aspect is also, research platforms, right? mRNA and others, as portfolios start to consolidate, where do companies want to focus and how do they take a therapeutic area-based approach to essentially start investing is another aspect of it.
Great. So one last question before we kind of open up for questions from the crowd. I want you to all hypothetically put your investor hat on and say, I'll give you $10 million, make a bet over the next 5 years on what portion of that, if we want to call it a train or part of the drug discovery, where do you think will have the highest rate of return in terms of utilizing AI? What would you bet on is going to work over the next 5, maybe 10 years? Mickey?
Yeah, I mean, we, as scientists, have done a really great job of curing cancer in mice, right? But last time I checked, I'm not a mouse, right? And so, there's a lot of effort in research, in understanding the effect of molecules, biologics, in treating various indications, and we have fantastic, publications and science that's reproducible. The attrition is it does not translate to human physiology, right? We have very little ability to predict why these things fail, right? Despite all the successes and all the Nobel Prizes and all the awards that have been given to basic science research, understanding why a small molecule does not have the same potency in a human is really being a big challenge, and actually it has driven up all the costs. It's now over $2 billion. And over 10 years for the life cycle of a successful drug. So if AI can make a stab at that, understanding how to de-risk preclinical assets to the clinical sphere, I think that will have a major, major impact on drug development.
Yeah, this is a great question. So it's timely also because I was just working on my 3-year plan, and I have this principle. For me to spend the 10 million is not a lot for what I want to do, but supposedly. So defining the like I said, the business, what I call the business objective function, not to make it 100% mathematical, adding the business to it, defining what are we optimizing for in this process. As far as I'm concerned on the D side, so I want to accelerate the timeline to market, and by saying that time to market is also time to submission, because that's the race between pharma companies who's going faster for similar indications and similar biological technologies to FDA or AMA or whatever regulation. So I think that that lack of predictability in certain TAs, for example, oncology, inflammatory disease are less predictable than virology. So I would definitely first and foremost pick 2 areas in these 2. And then I will invest heavily in the early part of clinical pharmacology with simulations. It's an amazing space. I'm a huge fan of my colleagues who are part of that Clean Farm organization. So I always really give them shout outs. They are scientists and they're very analytical, and they generate a lot of data. For example, PK, like a lot of simulations, dosing. Very important to know that these things at scale using simulation and digital twins, I think that's the future, because you can predict digitally and virtually what can happen before you go spend billions in a clinical trial for the upcoming 10 years. So really shortening the timelines by investing early on.
Nirav, what are you going to spend your $10 million on?
Yeah, I think, I agree with both Mickey and Yusuf here, but, I think if I look at where the success rate is, going back to Mickey's point, right, coming out of research, that's obviously the biggest space right now where acceleration is needed, right? Translational research, going from animal trials into getting real proof points is where, a lot of the focus is. My hope is that over the next 5 years, that's something that we'll be able to overcome, because I think for all the other areas that we are talking about, I think a lot of progress is being made on the D side, right? The other part is also, it's not just on the research side as well as pharma, it's also regulators, right? As we look at this end-to-end life cycle, the transparency coming out of the regulators is really improving. If anybody is tracking, there were 200, CRLs that were released by the FDA recently, on essentially the, reasons for rejection, right? Really, really important data sets to say, what is it that will shorten the timelines in terms of making sure that not just from a technical but regulatory standpoint as well, what would it take to actually cut down some of the life cycles to get these drugs faster to market? So the transparency is improving, but we have to remember it's an ecosystem. So it'll take everyone to do their bit, everything from researchers to development, within large pharma as well as regulators. Right?
Yeah. Real quick, Nirav, do you think regulatory is helping or hurting AI progress in the field?
I think it's early days to actually, sort of answer whether it's helping or hurting. I do know that the progress is made tremendously fast, right? Everybody's asking the right questions to say, hey, what should we be doing from a regulatory standpoint to sort of, accelerate the use of AI? The concerns are real too, right? And not unfounded. So I wouldn't say it's helping or hurting. I think the opportunity is now to make sure that the guidance are coming out as quickly as possible to accelerate.
All right, fantastic. So with that, I want to open up to the audience. Does anyone have any questions for anyone on the panel? We have a microphone as well.
I know my question, I'm a biologist, but also a genomic scientist. I know when you consider the timeline, okay, the life cycle, it's whenever we talk about a drug come to, in reality, it takes 10 to 15 years or 20 years. That includes also post-market surveillance. Given this time as life cycle, where do you think that, for example, there is a potential option to go to the preclinical area? Preclinical, again, this mice going to help, but now government has different policy. Well, let's use human cells to do the preclinical study. But again, it is going to add more variants. So what do you guys think about? I think that is one of the places where there should be more role for AI. You talked about genomics, transcript, everything. What do you guys think about the recent multimodal approach? People talks here even, where it could be kind of break the silos, so that way it could accelerate the whole process in a positive way.
I can take a stab at that. I think it's related to the questions that were raised earlier about focus. And honestly, I don't think enough time is spent on asking what are the right questions we should be addressing. I think there's, we're all like kids in a candy store. Every day, there's a new shiny tool that emerges in the AI space. And it's very easy to get overwhelmed. And unless you have a clear AI strategy, right, you're going to be diluting your efforts and chasing every new shiny toy and not actually moving the needle in any meaningful aspects. I'll give you an example of where I think AI is perhaps, the barrel of AI is perhaps focused on the wrong target, wrong problem area. So in drug development, understanding how a molecule or drug or biologic binds to a target is a critical step, right? And there's a lot of well-meaning, well-intentioned efforts by AI scientists of designing new molecules in silico on a computer that have better binding properties to a target. And this is leveraging over the recent successes of AlphaFold. Can we predict the structure of these two molecules binding together? It's a very noble and aspirational goal, but it's actually not even all that useful in drug development, right? And the reason, and I think it's because as machine learning scientists, we kind of over-index on problems that are measurable rather than meaningful. Binding data is relatively easy to capture. It's readily available. And so you can design a really good predictor or generative algorithm for a better binder to a target. But once you've optimized that problem, you've now created further problems downstream which you haven't thought about. A better binder may have poor drug-like properties. It may be more toxic. Right? So if you're over-optimizing on one aspect of the train, which sounds like a great goal, you lose the whole train. Right? So this is why it's really important to have this culture of where the ML scientists really understand the biology and get involved in understanding developability in the clinical trial aspects, not just focus on their own specific problems. It isn't, you really can't, if you start over-optimizing too early, you will fail.
Yeah, Mickey, quick question on that, right? In your mind, how many computationally generated, molecules, right, even though they're theoretically possible to bind, actually make it to stable drugs that are actually marketable? AI can generate a lot of possibilities, but how many of those are real stable drugs that can actually be marketed?
Great question, and the answer is we don't know yet, because it's so little effort focused on understanding what makes a good drug, right? And for most machine learning scientists in this space, to them, a good drug is something that binds well. There's so many other factors that are much more relevant. And in fact, I'll go one step further and say the plethora of in silico designed drugs is actually creating a new problem, right? These are drugs which the human body has not seen in our millions of years of evolution. So you're creating possible, immunogenicity side effects, immune reaction, which isn't thought about. I'll be very hesitant to put something into my body that was designed in silico, knowing that it's very, very foreign to the evolution of the human genome.